How did love turn into this? That night,
She stood at the edge of a porch that wasn't hers anymore. 7 months pregnant, hair soaked, hands shaking. A suitcase with a busted zipper sat at her feet like it was ashamed to be seen with her. Then the door slammed. Ethan's voice cut through the rain like a blade. "Get out, you and that baby, nothing to me." Lena didn't flinch right away. She froze, the way people do when the world spins too fast. It wasn't the first time he'd raised his voice, but tonight it sounded final. Final like a judge's gavel, final like a casket lid. Neighbors watched from their windows, old lace curtains lifting, blinds tilted just so. An elderly man shook his head. A woman across the street whispered to another, she should have seen it coming. The storm soaked her, but the stares stung worse. It always does when people watch a woman fall apart and call it entertainment. Ethan tossed a plastic container across the porch. It exploded in the mud, cold rice, broken lid, just like that. "You're lucky I don't call the cops," he said, smug, already bored of crushing her. Lena held her belly. She didn't beg. Not this time. She stared at the man she once waited up for, the man she defended at Thanksgiving when her mother warned her about that look in his eyes, ambition with no brakes. "I loved you," she said, barely louder than the rain. "That's your problem," Ethan replied, and the door shut like the end of a chapter. She stepped off the porch because there was nowhere else to stand. Mud swallowed her shoes. Lightning ghosted across the sky. She whispered to the child beneath her ribs, "It's okay, baby, I'm here." She said it twice so one of them might believe it. Every street lamp felt like a spotlight. Every parked car felt like a witness. She told herself she'd walk to her mother's, but even the thought made her chest cave in. Because her mother had warned her, and pride is a hungry thing. And because a text dinged on her cracked phone, "Don't go to your mom's. I told her you ran off with someone." Ethan had made sure even her name didn't belong to her anymore. The screen flickered and died in a puddle. For a long moment, there was only rain and the sound of a baby shifting inside her like a small tide. A pair of headlights slowed. Tires whispered against wet asphalt. She pulled back, instinct taut as wire. No, not this, not another man with a fix or a favor that costs more than it's worth. The car stopped anyway, not too close. Not a threat just there. A door opened. A black umbrella rose like a moon. The man who held it didn't shout over the storm. He didn't make a scene. He walked with calm, clean footsteps, expensive shoes getting dirty without care. His voice arrived first, low, steady, like heat in winter. "Hey, you okay?" Lena's throat closed. She wanted to say, "I'm fine." She wanted to say, "Please leave." What came out was a sound she didn't recognize. He stepped just close enough to shelter her under the umbrella without crowding her. "You shouldn't be out here like this," he said. "Not tonight." She saw him then, sharp profile, rain on his lashes, eyes that didn't flinch at the worst part of her. Not a savior's glow, not pity, just attention. The kind a person gives when they've learned the cost of not paying it. "I don't know where to go," she admitted, and the truth hurt more than the rain. "I'm Alexander," he said, as if names could keep them both steady. "Let me get you warm, just warm, then you decide." She weighed every warning she'd ever been taught. Don't trust a stranger. Don't accept a ride. Don't let a man see you broken. But the wind cut through her sweater like teeth. A cramp pinched low and mean, and fear bloomed. She nodded, small. He matched her smallness, stepping back so she could walk first. Inside the car, the heater breathed out relief. The smell of cedar and rain and clean leather wrapped her like a blanket she didn't ask for but needed. He handed her a towel and looked away while she pressed it to her face, the rarest decency in a late-night thunderstorm. "Where to?" he asked, not touching the console, not moving them until she chose. She swallowed. I can't go to my mom's." "Okay, no questions." "Hospital," he offered. She shook her head. "It's not time. I just need a place for a minute." "A minute," he said, like a promise. He eased the car back into the street. They drove through a small town that always felt bigger when you're scared. Storefronts blurred, pawn shops, a laundromat with a flickering open sign, a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and second chances that never quite landed. She stared out at all the places people could sit and still be alone. "Do you want to talk?" he asked, eyes on the road. "No." Then, softly, "Yes." The words slipped out before she could hold them back. "He said I was worthless without him." A muscle ticked in Alexander's jaw, but his voice stayed level. "He's wrong." He said, her voice cracked. "He said this baby ruined me, that I stopped being a wife." "He's wrong," Alexander said again, steady as the wipers. It wasn't a pep talk. It sounded like math, fact. Silence took the middle seat and behaved itself. Street by street, the storm rearranged itself from rage to rhythm, the way storms do when they remember how to breathe. Memories crowded in anyway, easier to see in rainlight. Ethan's late nights, the too sweet perfume that clung to his shirts, the way an apology can sound like a door closing, the way a door can become a verdict. "Do you have someone to call?" Alexander asked. "My phone's gone," she glanced at her lap, "and my pride's tired." "Fair," he said, and something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth without reaching his eyes. "Here's my offer. One night, a shower. A meal you don't have to apologize for. You can leave at dawn if you want." "Why?" Her gaze flicked to him. It wasn't suspicion, it was survival. "Why are you being kind?" Is a language most single mothers learn, even before they become single. "Because," he said, and searched the right words like they mattered, "nobody should give birth to fear." They passed the hospital's glowing sign. She watched it recede like a lighthouse she wasn't ready for yet. When the car slowed again, it was in front of a house that didn't look like money trying to be seen. It looked like money that learned how to be quiet. Stone, warm light rained candles on glass. She stiffened. "I can't stay here." "You can," Alexander said softly. "Or you can just come inside and warm up. If this makes you uncomfortable, say it and I'll take you to a hotel. You have the wheel here." That part, the wheel, mattered. The door opened before they knocked. A woman in her 50s, crisp uniform, kind face. Her eyes took Lena in and did the opposite of what people had been doing all night. They softened. "Let's get you dry, sweetheart." No hesitation. No "what did you do?" just action. Upstairs, steam lifted from a hot shower. Clean cotton framed a mirror that held a stranger her but paler. Lena pressed a palm to the foggy glass where her belly rounded, and for the first time since the porch, her breath didn't shatter on its way out. Downstairs, a kettle hissed. Somewhere, a clock counted gentle seconds. She, wrapped in a robe, followed the scent of chamomile to a room that held a small fire and shelves stacked like a quiet city. Alexander set a cup near her hand. "No sugar," he said, "but I can fix that." "No," she whispered. "This is good." The first sip undid a knot she'd been wearing for 2 years. Her shoulders dropped an inch, maybe two. "Rooms are made up," the housekeeper said from the doorway, "and a warm plate is coming. Nothing heavy." "Thank you," Lena said. The woman's smile lingered long enough to sew something back together. Lena sat. The fire crackled low. Her fingertips trembled, the way hands do when they finally meet safety and don't know how to act around it. Alexander didn't fill the space with small talk. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, the umbrella leaning like a sentinel by the door. "My name is Lena," she said after a while, as if she owed the room proof she existed. "Lena," he repeated, "not miss, not ma'am." He set the name down with care. "You're not, you know," she gestured, vaguely embarrassed. "You're not expecting anything," he shook his head once. "I expect you to sleep, eat, decide." "People don't help like that," she said, the bitterness tired but alive. "Not without wanting a piece of you." He didn't argue. He didn't say "I'm different." He just said, "I had a night once. Not like this, but it felt the same. Somebody showed up. I try not to forget that." Her eyes burned. She blinked it back, then let it come anyway, tears that made no noise. Tears that had been waiting for a room that wouldn't use them against her. She wiped them with the back of her hand like she could still be tough. It made her look braver, not weaker. A plate arrived, good bread, chicken soup, nothing fancy, the kind of humble that respects hunger. She ate slow, like the food might run if she moved too fast. When she was done, the housekeeper took the plate and left the door open just enough to say, "You're not trapped." "Thank you," Lena said again, the two words heavier than they sounded. "You're welcome," Alexander said. "If you need anything in the night, press the brass button by the bed. It dings a bell downstairs. And if anything changes, pain, cramps, say it." "We go, no questions," she nodded. A small cramp tugged as if to test him. It passed. She exhaled. "Good night, Lena. Good night." In the guest room, the sheets smelled like sun and patience. She eased onto the bed, one palm cupping the curve of her belly like a promise. She looked at the window, rain braided into silver threads, and hung them across the glass. For the first time in weeks, there was no shouting, no perfume she didn't wear, no apology rehearsed in the mirror. Just breath. She closed her eyes, the kind of sleep that finds you when you stop bargaining. Sometime around the hour when fear likes to knock, pain stabbed, sharp, low, electric. Lena sat up fast, breath hitching. Another pain followed, harder, closer. "Okay," she whispered to the baby, voice thin. "Not yet, not yet, not yet." Another, she gasped. Down the hall a bell chimed once, then twice, then hurried feet. The door swung gently. The housekeeper's face changed from "What do you need?" to "We're moving now," in a heartbeat. "Mr. Cole," she called. "Now." Alexander arrived at a run, sleeves rolled, eyes clear with a kind of fear that knows exactly what to do. "Lena, talk to me." "Pain," she managed. "Close together." He nodded, already grabbing the prepared bag the housekeeper had placed by the door because women who have seen life know how to anticipate it. "We're going," he said. No panic. Just decision. The night opened its wet mouth again as they moved down the stairs. He didn't carry her. He steadied her, one hand at her elbow, the other holding umbrellas like shields. The car door was warm from the garage heat. The engine woke quick. "Stay with me," he said, eyes flicking between the road and her. "Breathe when it spikes. In for 4, out for 6. We're almost there." She did as told because for the first time tonight, following didn't feel like losing herself. They reached the ER entrance. Nurses materialized, swift, capable, voices like Velcro catching everything that might fall. A wheelchair rolled. A nurse pressed a hand to Lena's shoulder. "We've got you, Mama." Down the corridor, fluorescent lights turned the rain into a distant rumor. Doors swished. Forms were signed with names that belonged to both the past and the future. Alexander tried to follow her through the double doors. A nurse stopped him with a firmness that was still kind. "Wait here." He did. The clock on the wall 8 minutes, one steady bite at a time. Somewhere a monitor beeped the shape of a heartbeat that wasn't his but might as well have been. He stood. He sat. He stood again. He looked like a man who had lived with control so long he forgot what it felt like to have none. And still he waited. The doctor finally came out, mask lowered, eyes professional and human. The kind that has learned how to tell the truth without breaking it. "She's stable," he said. "The baby's early but strong. We're working to keep things calm." The storm outside softened to a hush that could almost be called mercy. Later, minutes or hours, time lost its old rules. Lena blinked awake in a room that smelled like antiseptic and second chances. The world arrived in pieces. Beeping, white light, blankets tucked just right, her own breath not fighting her anymore. She turned her head slowly, carefully, and saw him in the chair by the window, too big for the space. Shoulders bowed the way men fold only when they think no one's watching. He lifted his head at the sound of her breath catching. "You're okay," he said, not asking. Her lips were dry. "The baby." "A fighter," he answered, and his voice did that thing where relief tries not to cry. "In the neonatal unit. Small but stubborn." Lena closed her eyes. A single tear slipped, quick as grace. "You stayed." "Of course," he said, as if there was no other option. She swallowed. "People usually leave when it gets inconvenient." "I'm not people." He said it without pride. Without performance, just plain. The monitor kept time for them. No one rushed the moment. Lena looked at the ceiling tile directly above her. There was a tiny nick in it, a flaw in the white. Funny, the things we cling to when everything else is in motion. She breathed in, breathed out, and somewhere deep inside, a knot loosened just enough to let hope stretch its legs. Outside, dawn practiced behind the clouds the way new days do before they step out. The storm had washed the streets clean, but storms always leave something behind. A branch, a puddle, a lesson. In the chair, Alexander studied the woman he'd met at the worst part of her life. He didn't know yet that her story would rethread itself through his own. He didn't know the past would come knocking with a face he thought he'd lost. He only knew this. When he'd said a minute, the night had agreed. And when he'd said we go, the world had moved. What happens when the person who threw you away tries to take your future too? What happens when kindness has a history? And how far can a mother go on nothing but courage and a child's heartbeat? The answers were already walking toward them. Paper trails, whispered names, a doorbell at midnight. But for now, in this small room with its steady beeping and its merciful air, Lena closed her eyes and rested. Tomorrow would ask for strength. Tonight had given her shelter. Morning came slowly, like the world was still deciding whether Lena deserved it. The storm had passed, but in her chest, thunder still rolled. When she opened her eyes, sunlight spilled across the blanket, warm, honest light that didn't need to apologize for shining. For the first time in months, she didn't wake to shouting. She woke to silence, to a fragile peace wrapped in antiseptic and clean sheets. A nurse checked her vitals, smiled softly, and whispered, "Your little one's doing just fine." A fighter, that one. Lena's heart squeezed. A fighter. Maybe she had to be one too. As the hours passed, the world returned in fragments. The taste of cold coffee, the echo of Ethan's laugh, the perfume, Vanessa's perfume, still haunting the edges of her mind. She closed her eyes, and suddenly the hospital ceiling dissolved into memory. Rain tapping on their old apartment window. Ethan's voice, sharper than glass. "Stop nagging, Lena. You think being pregnant makes you a queen." She tried to reason, to remind him of the promises they made when they had nothing but dreams and cheap coffee. But every night he'd come home later. The man who once held her hand now rolled his eyes when she spoke. Then came Vanessa, perfect smile, perfect nails, the kind of woman who looked like she'd never known hunger. The night Vanessa showed up at their door, everything ended. Her mind snapped back to the hospital room, to the rhythmic beep of machines. She exhaled shakily. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I beg someone to love me." The door opened, and Alexander stepped in, the same calm presence, but this time his eyes carried something heavier. Worry maybe, or exhaustion he refused to show. He carried 2 cups of tea, setting one gently beside her. "You should be resting," he said. "I am," she replied, forcing a small smile. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "I called your doctor. They said you and the baby are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, like a language she hadn't spoken in years. "You didn't have to stay," she murmured. "I didn't have to," he said, "but I wanted to." He sat beside her bed, not too close, but close enough that his presence filled the space between fear and gratitude. Lena watched him, the faint bruise of sleeplessness under his eyes, the way he looked out the window before speaking again. "You have somewhere to go after this," she hesitated. "Nowhere that would want me. Then you'll stay with me. Just until you figure things out." Her heart raced. I don't even know you." "I know," he said gently, "but I know what it's like to have no one answer the door when you need it most." The room went quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. 2 days later, Lena stood before a house that could have been mistaken for a dream. Stone walls climbing toward the sky, glass windows glimmering like calm water. It wasn't a mansion that screamed wealth, it whispered it. Every inch of it felt too polished for someone who'd slept in fear. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled faintly. "I don't bring people here often." "Why me?" "Because," he said, "you needed it more than I do." Inside, warmth hugged her like an apology the world had owed her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gray, appeared, a woman in her 50s with a kind face and eyes that noticed everything. "Oh, poor thing," she said, helping Lena inside. "Let's get you something warm, and clothes that fit properly." Upstairs, a nursery had been prepared, soft blankets, white curtains, a crib waiting by the window. Lena froze. "You didn't have to," Alexander cut her off gently. "I wanted to make sure your child never feels unwelcome." Her throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to say she couldn't accept it, but the words never came. At night, the mansion was too quiet. Silence had its own voice here, deep, echoing, and filled with questions. Lena lay awake, the faint hum of the city outside mixing with her thoughts. Every creak of the hallway sounded like Ethan's footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like his laughter. She pressed her baby close. "You're safe," she whispered. "He can't find us here." But the truth is, fear doesn't need a key to get inside. It lives in the corners of memory. Downstairs, Alexander sat in his study, staring at a photograph turned face down. A woman with kind eyes and a little girl smiled up from the frame. His hand trembled as he traced the edge of the glass before turning it over again. He whispered to no one, "I'm sorry." Days blended together. Lena healed slowly, both body and spirit. She helped Mrs. Gray in the kitchen, folded laundry, even watered the plants in the courtyard. Routine felt strange but good, like life was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. But whispers travel faster than kindness. One afternoon, she passed by the servants' hallway and heard two maids murmuring. "She's lucky, that one," said the younger maid. "Shows up with nothing, gets the master's attention overnight." "Lucky," the older scoffed. "Don't be fooled. Rich men don't do charity without reason." "You think she's his mistress?" A sharp gasp escaped Lena before she could stop it, and the voices fell silent. She hurried away, heart pounding. Later, as she folded tiny baby clothes, the words replayed. Mistress, pity case, stranger. She'd come here for safety, but now she felt like a guest in her own life. She found Alexander outside in the garden trimming roses. The smell of earth and rain hung heavy in the air. He looked up as she approached. "You don't have to help," he said. "I want to," she replied. "It keeps my hands busy." He handed her a pair of gloves. "Careful with the thorns," she smiled faintly. Beautiful things usually come with them. They worked side by side in silence, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. Finally she said, "People in this house, they talk." He nodded slowly. "People always do. They think I'm something I'm not." "Then let them think," he said calmly. "The truth doesn't need an audience." She looked at him, searching for the motive behind his calm. "You never get angry, do you?" "Anger wastes energy," he said quietly. "I used to have plenty. Not anymore." There was something in his voice that sounded like a scar. That night, Lena sat by the nursery window, watching the city lights shimmer in puddles below. The baby slept peacefully, tiny breaths filling the room. Her own reflection stared back at her, tired eyes but stronger. She whispered to her sleeping child, "We'll leave soon. We can't stay here forever. I don't belong in a house like this." But part of her wondered if she was lying. Because for the first time since she'd been thrown out, she felt something like belonging. Downstairs, Alexander's phone rang. His voice, usually calm, was sharp now, almost angry. "I told you I'm not letting that happen again," he said. Silence. Then quieter, "No, she doesn't know yet and she doesn't need to, not now." Lena froze at the top of the stairs, the words piercing through the dark. She doesn't need to know yet. She retreated to her room, heart pounding. What secret was he hiding? Why did her name sound like a burden in his voice? She lay awake until dawn, fear curling up beside her once more. The next morning, breakfast felt different. Alexander sat at the table, his expression distant. "Rough night?" she asked. He looked up, startled. "Just business." "Business that mentions me." He froze for a second, just a second, but it was enough. "Lena," he said softly, "there's something you should know, about your husband and about me." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and unclear. Before she could ask, the sound of the baby's cry broke the moment. Alexander stood. "We'll talk later." But they both knew later might never come. In the days that followed, peace became a balancing act, one heartbeat of calm, one heartbeat of fear. Lena didn't know what Alexander was hiding, only that his kindness carried a shadow. And somewhere in another part of the city, a man she once loved and feared was watching her life rebuild from afar, his jealousy burning hotter than regret. The storm wasn't over. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike again. Because hope, even when it's fragile, has enemies. The days that followed were quieter, but quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes, it's just the world holding its breath before the next storm. Lena woke early each morning to the sound of birds on the windowsill, sunlight spilling across the crib. Her baby, little Noah, slept with tiny fists clenched, as if even in dreams he was ready to fight for life. She whispered to him, "You and me, kid. We made it through the rain. That means we can make it through anything." Every day, Lena grew a little stronger. She helped around the mansion, folding linens, tending to the garden, answering phone calls for the Cole Foundation. The foundation was Alexander's life's work, a charity that helped women rebuild after abuse and loss. At first, she only stayed busy to keep her mind off the past. But soon, she realized she wasn't just helping strangers. She was helping herself. Mrs. Gray noticed the change. "You're different these days," she said one morning. Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm finally breathing." The older woman chuckled softly. "Or maybe you've stopped apologizing for doing it." That afternoon, Lena brought in a stack of files from the foundation office. Alexander sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, concentration drawn tight across his face. "You work too much," she said softly. He looked up, surprised by her interruption. "That's what people who can't sleep do." "You have nightmares." He hesitated, a long, quiet hesitation. "Not nightmares, memories." She nodded slowly. "I have those too." For a long moment they said nothing. Two people haunted by different ghosts, sitting in the same room pretending not to need company. Then he broke the silence. "You know, you're good with the women at the foundation. They listen to you. Maybe because I know what it's like to need to be heard," she replied. He smiled, small but real. "Then stay, officially. I could use the help." "You mean a job?" "I mean purpose," he said. Her heart swelled, not with romance, but with the strange relief of finally being seen for more than her pain. That night, Lena passed Alexander's study and paused at the open door. Inside, he sat by the fire, a drink untouched in his hand. His eyes were lost in a photograph, a woman holding a child. Lena stepped closer. "She's beautiful," she said quietly. He didn't flinch. "She was. I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right," he said. "You'd have met her. She loved helping people, probably would have dragged you into the foundation before I ever did." "What happened?" Lena asked softly. He took a breath that sounded heavier than grief. "Car accident 2 years ago. I was on a flight home that night. I should have been there." The guilt in his voice made her chest ache. She didn't offer cliches. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She just whispered, "I'm sorry," and that was enough. He turned toward her, eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Don't be. You've already done more for me than anyone has in a long time." "How?" she asked. "You reminded me that the world doesn't end when people leave. It just pauses." Word spread quickly through the mansion and beyond. The staff whispered that Mr. Cole's mysterious house guest now worked beside him, every day, every meeting, every event. "She's changed him," one maid whispered. "Or he's trying to change her," said another. Lena pretended not to hear, but sometimes, at night, the words pressed against her like thorns. She'd come so far, yet still felt like a stranger in her own story. One afternoon, as she sorted donation letters, a voice behind her said, "You shouldn't care what they say." She turned. Alexander stood there, holding a folder, reading her too easily. "I don't," she lied. "You do," he said softly. "We all do. But the only opinions that matter are the ones you build your life around. Choose carefully." She wanted to ask him what opinions he built his life around, but something in his eyes told her the answer was still buried. 2 weeks later, Alexander invited her to a fundraising gala for the foundation, her first public event since the night she was thrown out. She almost said no, but he'd said something that lingered. "It's time people saw your strength, not your scars." So she went. The ballroom glimmered with gold and glass, laughter swirling with the scent of champagne. For the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel invisible, but she didn't feel like she belonged either. When Alexander introduced her to donors, he didn't call her a victim. He said, "This is Lena, one of the bravest women I've ever met." And for a heartbeat, the world stood still. That night after the gala, Lena couldn't sleep. She wandered the mansion, tracing her fingers along the walls lined with memories. In Alexander's study, a shelf door hung slightly ajar. She meant only to close it, but inside, lying face down, was a photograph she'd never seen before. She turned it over and froze. It was her father, smiling proudly, arm around a younger version of Alexander. Her breath caught. No, no, that can't be. Before she could think, a shadow moved in the doorway. Alexander stood there, eyes dark with exhaustion and something else. I guess, he said quietly, I should have told you sooner. She clutched the photograph to her chest. You knew my father. I did, he said. He was my mentor, the first man who ever believed I could be more than my past. Her voice trembled. You worked for him. I worked with him, Alexander said. And when he died, I promised him I'd look after you. Tears welled in her eyes. Promised him. You knew me. He nodded slowly. You were 16. You used to bring him lunch at the office every Friday. I remember. Memories flooded back, flashes of a younger Alexander, quiet, polite, always serious. My mom said you were too old for jokes, she said weakly, almost smiling through the shock. I was too old for a lot of things back then, he murmured. Lena's hands trembled. All this time you knew who I was. Why didn't you tell me? He hesitated. Because I didn't know how. Try, she whispered. He took a slow breath. After your father died, I tried to find you, but you were gone. Your husband, Ethan, made sure of that. He told me you didn't want anything from your father's past life, that you'd married well, that I should stay away. Her heart slammed in her chest. He said that? Yes, Alexander said quietly. And I believed him. I thought he was protecting you. I didn't realize, her voice cracked. Didn't realize what? That he was the reason your father lost everything. Lena staggered back. The photograph slipped from her hands, landing face down like truth refusing to stay upright. What are you saying? Alexander's voice was low, heavy with guilt. Ethan worked for your father. He managed the finances, but he forged documents, fake transfers. He stole from your father's company and mine. By the time we caught it, your father took the blame. He died protecting him. Lena's knees buckled. No, no, you're lying. I wish I were. She covered her face. I married the man who killed my father's name. Alexander's voice cracked. You didn't know? I should have, she whispered, trembling. My mother warned me. She said ambition without soul is poison, and I still drank it. Alexander stepped closer, his tone soft but steady. He fooled us all, Lena. But you survived him. That matters more than anything he ever took. They stood in silence, two lives tangled by grief, betrayal, and fate. Outside, thunder rolled once more, echoing through the house like the ghosts of their shared past. And then the sound neither of them expected. The front gate buzzer. Mrs. Gray's voice carried faintly from downstairs. Sir, someone's here, asking for Miss Lena. Lena's blood ran cold. Alexander's expression hardened. Stay here, he said, but she followed anyway down the staircase, every step slower than her heartbeat. When Alexander opened the door, rain spilled in, and with it the past. Ethan, soaked, wild-eyed, a shadow of the man who once sneered at her from their porch. Lena, he said, his voice raw, desperate, I need to talk to you. Alexander stepped in front of her instantly. You need to leave. Ethan smirked weakly. Still playing the hero, huh? Thought you'd be taller. Lena froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Don't do this, she whispered. But Ethan's eyes darted between them and his grin turned cruel. Oh, Lena, he said. You think you know this man, your savior. You don't even know half the story. The room held its breath. Thunder cracked across the sky. And just like that, the past, the betrayal, the truth, the pain, all collided at once in the doorway of that house. The man who destroyed her life had returned. And this time he wasn't leaving quietly. The rain outside didn't stop that night. And inside, 3 hearts waited for the truth to decide who would be forgiven and who would finally fall. The storm had come back. Not from the sky. This time it was standing in the doorway. Ethan's clothes clung to him, his eyes darting between Lena and Alexander. He looked smaller, but arrogance still clung to him like mildew. Lena, he said, voice breaking on her name, I need to talk to you, alone. Alexander's tone was steel. "You've done enough talking." Ethan laughed, a dry, empty sound. "You think you're her savior. You don't know the half of it." He pulled an envelope from his coat, creased, wet, official. He dropped it on the coffee table. "Go ahead, read it." The paper smelled of damp and old lies. Lena unfolded it carefully, her fingers trembling. Contracts, signatures, her father's name beside Alexander's company seal. "What is this?" she whispered. Ethan leaned back against the doorframe. "Proof. Proof that your dear billionaire here ruined your father, the deal that crushed his company. The reason he died broke." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. His silence frightened her more than Ethan's words. "Tell me it's not true," she said softly. Alexander's voice came low. "It isn't the full story," Ethan snorted. "Of course not. There's always a version that makes rich men the heroes." "Get out," Alexander said, standing. "Not until she knows who she's living with." Lena's heart thudded. "Enough," she whispered. "Both of you." She looked at Alexander, really looked at him. "I deserve the truth." He nodded once. "You do." Alexander moved slowly to the fireplace, rainlight flickering across his face. "Years ago," he began, "your father's company was collapsing because the city council had been bleeding him dry with false permits and unpaid contracts. I stepped in to help him, to protect his projects. We signed that deal so he could keep building." Ethan's sneer twisted. "And he lost everything." Alexander's eyes flashed. "He lost everything because someone inside his own office stole from both of us. Your father trusted his financial manager completely." Lena's breath caught. "Who?" Alexander turned to her. "Ethan." The word landed like glass shattering. "He forged transfer requests," Alexander continued quietly. "Moved the money into shell accounts, left your father to take the blame. When the fraud came to light, your father protected him, said it was his mistake." Lena's knees weakened. "You're lying," Ethan spat, but his voice cracked on the last word. Alexander reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out another paper, an audit report, old but clear. "These were uncovered a week after your father's death. I spent years trying to trace the man behind the forgery. He'd vanished." Ethan's bravado slipped. "You can't prove anything." Alexander looked him dead in the eyes. "You just did by showing up here with forged documents you thought I'd burned." Lena stepped forward, trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You destroyed everything, my father, my life." Ethan's face twisted into something between shame and defiance. "I gave you a life. I fed you, clothed you. You owned me," she said sharply. "There's a difference." Her voice cut through the room like thunder, finally finding its target. 2 nights later, the world saw the truth. The Cole Foundation's annual charity gala was bright, golden, filled with cameras and applause. Alexander had invited Ethan, pretending reconciliation. Lena stood beside him, a calmness about her that came only from exhaustion that had finally turned into resolve. Ethan arrived, confident again, the kind of man who believed he could charm his way out of justice. Alexander greeted him like a polite host. "Enjoy the evening," he said. "There's a special presentation later." Hidden microphones recorded every word that followed. Hidden cameras caught the smirk when Ethan bragged to another guest. "Old man Harris thought he was clever. Never figured out it was me siphoning the accounts." A cruel laugh. "You gotta know when to take what you can. World's not kind to nice guys." Minutes later, the footage hit the projection screen. The ballroom went silent. The recording echoed through the speakers, Ethan's voice, word for word. Laughter, confession, guilt. Security moved in quietly. Police followed. Ethan turned to Lena, panic flaring in his eyes. "Lena, please, you have to believe me." She looked at him, calm, almost pitying. "I used to believe you. That was my mistake." He reached for her arm. Alexander stepped between them, voice low but final. "Don't touch her." As the officers led him away, Ethan's voice cracked one last time. "You think this makes you clean, Cole. You'll never wash her father's blood off your hands." Alexander didn't respond. He didn't have to. The truth already had. The next morning, the headlines spread like sunrise. "Businessman exposed for fraud in 15-year-old case." Single mother's courage uncovers decade of lies. The world that once ignored her now wanted to hear her voice. Weeks later, Lena stood behind a podium at a women's conference, Noah perched on her hip. The hall was full, mothers, daughters, survivors all listening. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady. I was thrown out in the rain with nothing but fear and a heartbeat inside me. I thought I'd lost everything. But sometimes, God doesn't punish you by taking things away. He saves you by removing what was destroying you. Applause rose like a wave. She smiled, small but true. We are not what was done to us. We are what we choose next. Among the crowd, Alexander watched quietly, pride softening the edges of his sorrow. That night the mansion was warm again. The rain had returned, gentle now, tapping against the glass like an old friend saying goodbye. Lena sat by the fire, Noah asleep in her arms. On the table lay a small envelope, postmarked from the county jail. She hesitated, then opened it. Ethan's handwriting, angry, uneven. "You won, Alex. She never looked at me the way she looked at you. Maybe she never could." Lena folded the letter without finishing it. She held it over the flame until it caught, paper curling, ashes drifting upward like ghosts set free. Alexander entered quietly. "What was that?" "Nothing worth keeping," she said, smiling faintly. He stepped closer, watching Noah sleep. "What will you tell him when he's older?" Lena looked down at her child, eyes glistening in the firelight. "That his father's sins made me strong," she whispered, "but his mother's courage made him free." Alexander smiled, gentle, proud, and a little broken. "Your father would be proud of you." She turned to him. "He'd be proud of us both." Outside, the storm finally passed. Inside, the world had changed, not in grand ways but in the small ones that matter most. The way she breathed without fear. The way hope felt like home again. In every life there's a night that seems endless, a night when the world decides you're finished. But endings are liars. Because sometimes all it takes is one kind voice in the rain to remind you that light can find you again. Lena didn't become rich. She didn't fall into a fairy tale romance. She built something rarer, peace. And from that peace, purpose. Now when storms roll over the city, she doesn't hide. She opens the window, lets the rain touch her hands, and whispers to her son, "See, we made it through." Because hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, quietly, faithfully, for you to pick it back up.